Gaming, like all things in this world, has its ups and its downs, its peaks and its valleys, the beautiful highs and the ancestrally grotesque lows. Simply put, there have been many great games, but with that is another edge to the blade, for every magnum opus is a game many would consider affront to God himself, and with hundreds of thousands of games out there, it's hard to keep track of every single bad one, the ones that didn't work, the ones that failed to deliver what they promised, and probably the most heinous of them all, the ones that just took the money and ran away, leaving an audience wondering where their game is, which in modern times happens far too often. Today I want to look at one of those games that had all the promise, had an audience backing it, and could have very well become a cult classic, a futuristic gore fest that really encapsulated the charm of early 2000s PC gaming, a game known as Drug Wars. So where exactly do we start? How do we even begin talking about a train wreck of a game like this? Well, we start with the one platform that to this day will allow us to purchase and play this game. That's right, we're talking about Steam. Steam needs no introduction, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a gamer who doesn't know what Steam is, seeing how it's one of the four cornerstones of online gaming, with a larger-than-life catalog of over 100,000 games, with many more games to be greenlit and added to the site's store in the future, though Steam Greenlight does have a lot of problems to it. Don't get me wrong, there are some hidden gems in there, but more often than not, they're inexperienced works that are a little too rough to be considered a game worth paying for. Others are jokes people put on the site just to meme, and more often than not, it's shovelware that people pump and dump mass-produced ideas in hopes of turning a profit off of them. But Drug Wars would come out way before this surge would pollute the site. It would debut on March 17th, 2009. Drug Wars would follow a world that's been divided into two factions after global warming had left most of the world inhabitable. You know, this is around the time Al Gore lost the presidential debate. He may have well had a hand in this storytelling. But in this dilapidated world, the mob crime syndicates have taken this opportunity to rise to power and rule the surface with an iron fist, even ruling over the Neanderthals that dwell below them, using them and exploiting them at every possible way, from workers to entertainment, even as gladiators in arenas that the mobs have set up to pit the Neanderthals against each other for their own entertainment. Unlike the other Neanderthals though, your Neanderthal is built different, built for tough in all the right places and decides to rebel against the mobs and the powers they hold. Your story is one of revolution and of chaos as you and your Neanderthal brethren fight to retake the surface. And looking back on the game trailer, it still to this day looks really cool. Unfortunately though, this is where my praise for the game ends. An interesting thing I found out while researching this game was that Drug Wars isn't even this game's original name. Originally it was called Merchants of Brooklyn, or MOB for short. So why the name change? Well, that's because this game had one of the biggest failures I don't see a lot of people talking about. The game itself, in short, was a hot mess. A hot mess that would cost you and anybody else interested in $5 before you fell into the sand pit. One big problem we have with playing this game in modern times is that it runs on old 32-bit processing, and in an era of 64-bit, it won't run effectively, unless we jump through some hoops and run it through an emulation like a virtual machine. But thankfully for us, we don't have to waste money or time trying to get that to work, because there have been enough people that, unfortunately, have played this game, and God forbid beaten it, to give us an accurate experience of what Drug Wars was like. The first major obstacle a lot of gamers ran into was, funnily enough, just trying to get this thing to start. It didn't matter if you launched it from the game files or if you launched it from Steam, the outcome was one of four. Either A, the game ran normally, which was very rare, B, it refused to launch, C, you'd be given an error message, or D, it would run for a bit and then crash. Even then, if you did find yourself beating the start screen boss, you would wish you didn't. Because beyond that start screen lies an amalgamation of horror beyond any of our comprehensions when it comes to game design. The lightest offense is that the game just has a very cut and dry story. That synopsis I gave you earlier, that's as deep as the game goes with it and doesn't even try to expand upon it. What you see is what you get. The mob is bad and you are good. You're sick of being oppressed, so you decide to rise up. And even then, you're not rewarded in the end of all this because the game leaves off on a cliffhanger, which leads many to believe that there was supposed to be a sequel for this game had it sold well, but surprise surprise, it didn't. I think it would have been a great expansion for the game had they delved deeper into both sides of the story. Maybe the Neanderthals aren't as good as they seem, and by keeping them primitively working, it stops them from hurting themselves or making decisions they shouldn't have access to, leading to a much more bigger topic that could have been discussed. On top of all this, you could have even delved deeper into the story of the mobs. Maybe they had hidden motives. Maybe they saw the only way that civilization could survive is if they were the ones to take the reins, and because of their blinded judgment, they couldn't make proper decisions that weren't morally unjust. Which I want to clarify really quick in saying that there's nothing inherently wrong with a weak, vague, or poorly constructed story to your game, especially if that's not the main focus of your game. A lot of small indie teams like Paleo Entertainment will usually focus on one game aspect over another. Either they'll focus on the gameplay aspect or the storytelling aspect. You just gotta make sure that whichever one you choose picks up where the other one is lacking. And a good example of both of these in action when they're used at their maximum efficiency is that storytelling games turn out like Telltale games or visual novels that you'll see on Itch.io or Game Jolt, whereas those that focus on gameplay over storytelling are things like Brotato and Metal Slug series, where the mechanics and gimmicks are so vast that it kinda outshines the little bit of lore that there is. Nowadays, a lot more tools have become accessible for game developers, so they have the time and resources to find a good effective balance between both. But back then, they really had to prioritize one over the others, so that does leave a question. Which one did they prioritize? Was it storytelling or gameplay? And seeing how weak their storytelling was, my bet's the gameplay. Which does bear a good question. Does this game hold up in gameplay where the story lacks? And if we were one of those unlucky people that constantly played this game until it would run normally, we'd be met with the main menu screen, which gives us 4 viable options. There's the exit option, which will close out the game at any time and is always the smartest option to do. Next is the options menu, where you can mess with the sound and audio, though if that's what gets your rocks off, I'm not gonna judge. There's the multiplayer, which had talks possibly of being online servers, though with what I know about this game, that wouldn't have worked. There's also local multiplayer, but for some reason a lot of people found that when you plugged a second controller in, the game refused to recognize that second controller, so you couldn't play multiplayer even if you wanted to. And then there's the creme de la creme, the magnum opus of this game, the single-player campaign, which takes the honorary title of the worst shit show I've ever seen. Keeping in mind that this game is only $5, the campaign is made up of 7 levels. 7 levels that could vary in clear times depending on a multitude of factors, none of which are tied into difficulty. More so the fact that because of how poorly constructed this game was, that you will find yourself clipping in and out of bounds to the point where you have to restart at checkpoints, or God forbid the beginning of a level again, you could get lost during these levels, or in most cases, the game just crashes and refuses to run again. This game also has a very interesting trope, I guess is what you would call it, where the devs thought it was a good idea to take as many enemies as possible and pack them into the tightest corridors on the map, so that when you turn a blind corner, you're instantly greeted by 15 men waiting to blow you away like John Marston. Speaking of the enemies and their AI, let's talk about how they contribute to this game breaking as well. Throughout the story, you'll find very few variants of enemies to fight. You'll either fight the main grunts, which are there for a majority of the game, and the mecha grunts, which are there at the end. In total, there are about 3 or 4 variants, but those other 2 I didn't mention are just color palette swaps of the first 2 that I did mention. On top of this, the enemies have a very weird oddity that's almost comedic. For every step they take in their walk cycle, it seems to pop them off the ground before resetting them at ground level, causing them to do this bobbing animation as they walk along, which is kind of funny when they're charging at you just bobbing along, but it gets really annoying, especially during some of the game portions that require stealth over guns a-blazing. During these sections, it's best to use a long-range sniper rifle to take out enemies so that you have to deal with as little people as possible when you actually get down into that area. Which, if you've ever tried to main a sniper class, you know it's annoying as hell to try and hit a moving target, especially nowadays where shooters try to implement realism whenever they can with bullet time and trajectory to every sniper rifle, meaning you have to do a bit of calculating before you pull the trigger. But this game was created in 2009 on, God forbid, the Cry engine, meaning it was a lot more like Team Fortress 2, where as long as the enemy's in your crosshair and you pull the trigger, you're gonna get a shot every time on them. The proper terminology for this is known as hit scan, where it's like shooting a laser from your gun, and as long as somebody's in that laser, it'll count as a hit. Whereas nowadays, they treat the bullets as individual objects, which gives them these realistic-like properties that you see in modern-day games. Which at this point, you've probably come to the same conclusion I have. If getting headshots in this game is so aggravating with a sniper rifle, why not just go for body shots instead? It still is a sniper rifle and should have the firepower necessary to one-tap most of the standard enemies, but that's where another big problem with the enemies in this game comes in, that being their hitboxes. You most likely don't need an introduction to hitboxes, seeing how they're a very basic component and building block of every game ever created, but what a lot of people don't know about hitboxes is how versatile they are across all gaming genres, from fighters to shooters to even racing simulators. In short, the versatility of these hitboxes is meant to give the games a more sense of realism. In fighting games, it's meant to make it feel like you're fighting another person. In racing games, it's supposed to make it feel like you're actually driving a car through different environments and scenarios. But when it comes to the hitboxes in Drug Wars, these do anything but immerse you in the world. For reasons I'll get into later, I don't know who created these hitboxes, but I think it's in the public's best interest as well as this person's own health and safety that they stay as far away as possible from game development. The hitboxes in these games remind me a lot of early Flash games. In fact, it makes those games look like Metal Gear Solid 5. Most of the enemy hitboxes are either shrunken down or just misproportionalized, meaning that when you shoot a magazine of bullets at these characters, they're just going to phase right through them without doing any sort of damage. So here's where I need to clear a few things up. Yes, the hitboxes are as broken as I talk about in this video, but there's another thing you need to know about these hitboxes. They're very interesting in how they interact with bullets, where if you shoot a bullet at an enemy in any other game, it stops dead in its tracks. Another good example is TF2, of course, where if you shoot a bullet at somebody, it's gonna stop when they hit the other person. But the bullets in this game for some reason don't register with the hit models of the characters. Therefore, when you shoot bullets at other people, they tend to just phase through them. This could confuse a lot of people believing that they're not doing damage when they should. The enemy health bar is displayed in the upper right hand corner, and if you pay attention to that while you're shooting, then you'll very much see that you are doing damage to these enemies. Don't get me wrong, they're still very broken, very busted, and more often than not it feels like a catch-22 of if your bullets will hit or not. Not to mention that some of the guns in this game just do not work. I've had this game for about 3 or 4 days of this recording, and the little that I played of it, because it crashed a lot, made it so that all the guns I had were virtually useless. Sometimes the bullets would work, sometimes they wouldn't. It's good to know that the hurt boxes on the head still work, but as I mentioned before, that bobbing up and down makes it really annoying to hit a headshot. Not to mention, some of the people say later on in the game, some of the guns you get just flat out don't work whatsoever, like they weren't play tested at all. On top of this, there's a very weird bug where if you kill an enemy, the game doesn't render them dead, so they'll stay there lying on the floor shooting at you. And because this game has no sound effects or indication that you're taking damage, you'll just slowly whittle away health until you die randomly and get sent back to the last checkpoint or the beginning of the level. And if that sounds bad, don't worry, it gets worse, because some of the enemies don't load in properly and will clip through walls or the floor, but still have full line of sight of you and be able to shoot you. And once again, there's no indication you're taking damage, so you're taking phantom bullets and phantom damage to the point where you just get a game over screen. It's really baffling that this game even got past playtesting, if it was playtested at all. You may remember earlier I said something along the lines that difficulty has nothing or very little to do with how fast or slow you'll clear these levels, which is a sentiment I still stand behind. This game isn't difficult, it's much so the fact that it's rotten like an apple down to its very core, and all its mechanics just do not work. But there will be people out there who will debate me on the point that stacking 15 enemies is considered a spike in difficulty, in which case I want to propose a scenario to you. Let's say I handed you a copy of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 from 2009 for the Xbox 360, a very nostalgic game that a lot of people my age are familiar with. And with this copy is one big difference, and that difference is what will earn you $10,000. I have changed one level of my choosing in this game. If you can beat it on any difficulty, you earn $10,000. This level in question is the Spec Ops mission Gillied Up. For those unaware of what Gillied Up is, it's a very simple mission where your only objective is to extract from the area. The difficulty in the level comes with the obstacles along the way, that being Russian soldiers, irradiated fields, dogs, and of course, the dreaded ghillie snipers. This is the main draw of the level, the ghillie snipers that hide in two of the main areas, the stables near the end and the open field at the very beginning. There is a set amount of snipers, and more snipers will not be added to those areas after you've taken care of all of them. The biggest problem with these snipers is that it's hard to pin them down. You'll only be able to find them by them moving around or by seeing the glint of their sniper scopes when they take aim. This becomes very hard to do on modes like Hardened or Veteran, where you get two-tapped by these snipers. Still pretty fair that it takes 2 sniper bullets to take you down on the hardest difficulty, giving you a little bit of leeway. Along the way, there's burnt out cargo crates, a church, destroyed tanks, all of which you can use as cover to hide from the sniper's sight and wait for yourself to heal up. But let's say in my modded version, I decide to take away all your cover. I still allow you to do it on any difficulty, but you have to now do the level with no cover. On top of this, I've added about 35,000 more snipers. I've taken away all the normal soldiers, and I've even gotten rid of the dogs for you. But now all that remains are these snipers. And just for a little extra salt in the wound, I decided it'd be fair if I made them have semi-automatic sniper rifles where they don't have to go through reload animations. You now see the challenge that I've set before you. In order to get that $10,000 I spoke of, all you have to do is beat my modded level, and the only objective in Gillied Up is to get to the extraction zone. How you do it is all on you. But you have to realize that between you and that extraction zone is a hell of my creation. A desolate wasteland of 30,000 plus snipers waiting with semi-automatic rifles to take you down the second you drop into the game. You have very few options, if any at all, and the second you drop in, there will be no cover to hide behind. And you may be thinking to yourself, cuckoo, that's a bit extreme and dare I say, unfair. And that's the whole point of this scenario. Fairness in video games. A lot of people nowadays, whether it's game journalists or people who just have a skill issue against most games, like to attribute difficulty and fairness to being similar if not the same thing, when in reality they both play their own parts in video games. Difficulty is always a choice, whereas fairness is always something that's given to you by the developers. A good example of this is the Soulsborne series. It doesn't matter what boss you go up against, they're all fair in a sense. Their move patterns always have a break in them, you're able to dodge out of or into certain attacks in order to negate damage, and you'll always have your opportunity to calculate what's happening, analyze the data, and formulate a plan off of what you're seeing. But in this game, it's exactly like the scenario I just gave you. Those 15 men in the hallway is intuition to the developers, and not to the player. When you create a game, you have to make it think logically. If you wanted this to work out, here's a good example. You would have had someone in the comm say, hey, there's 2 hallways up ahead. To the left, there's a large group of enemies. To the right, there's no enemies at all. That gives you the intuition that and the knowledge that there are enemies up ahead, and you can avoid them completely, but you could also face them head on if you wanted to. This all culminating to if you wanted to fight the enemies or not for the sake of an Easter egg, maybe a secret weapon, maybe even just an achievement. There's always a reason to giving information and knowledge to the players. Yes, there's troll games, but Drug Wars isn't a troll game. It's not meant to make you suffer through aimlessly. It's not Bennett Foddy's. It's a game that's an FPS shooter that is supposed to be taking itself seriously and tries so hard to do so. But because of how mismanaged it is, it can't be taken serious in the slightest. Kinda like that kid who keeps crying wolf. You can only fuck up so many times before nobody takes you seriously. Which leads me into the last and final thing that's wrong with this game. The intuition and level design of it. The levels do have a bit of charm to them once you get past all the walls and floors you'll clip through, textures that failed to load in, the misproportioned collision boxes, the very sad puzzles you have to solve, and of course my favorite, the textures that seem to stretch on into infinitum until the engine crashes. In the small amount of time that I got to play this game, I didn't get to witness any of the puzzles that the levels had to offer, but from what I've read, they're nothing that special. It's not like you have to learn Braille or Morse code in order to beat these levels. It's just finding a propane tank and some rubble to open up a new pathway, which I can only expect from a first-person shooter. But a lot of people have also said that these puzzles open up more problems than solutions, with the direction of these levels being very convoluted, almost like a spiderweb. And it's after running around this spiderweb for about an hour and a half that you'll start to see the preconceived intuition that the developers had while developing these levels start bleeding through. Because for some reason, every level follows that same trope of hiding the way you're supposed to go in the most obtuse locations. You solved 15 puzzles just to be met with a dead end? Guess what? That small slit in the wall at the beginning of the level, that's actually the intended path. Go through that, solve 15 more puzzles, and bada bing bada boom, you're there. It's so stupid that you have to think like a dumbass in order to get through these levels. This is why you have to think for all and not for one. This is why you have playtesters, but seeing how this was a small indie team, it seems that they either didn't care or have the time to ask people to playtest their game, because nobody under any sort of spectrum would have said that this was a very intuitive system. And when you couple this with the fact that the game itself in terms of lighting is very dark, you could pass by these hallways 5 or 10 times and not even know it because they blend into the darkness. Or you could have the texture stretch across the doorway, meaning that it's fully concealed by a broken texture. You'll never be able to find it unless somebody else told you it was there. And seeing how there's no gameplay of this game up on YouTube, there's no walkthrough that you can use. Which just leaves us with one question. Who made this game? Upon going to the Steam page for Drug Wars, you may notice that it was both developed and published by the same indie team, a group known as Paleo Entertainment. And seeing how Drug Wars is their only released game on the platform, very little is known about them. But thankfully, they have a Valve developer community page, so we know a bit of their origins. Paleo Entertainment would be founded in 2006 by a man named Troy Latimer. Troy had created Paleo for the sole purpose of, and I quote, creating fun Paleolithic-style video games online. It turns out that even before Drug Wars came out, him and his mod team had created something called Paleolithic Revolution, a multiplayer mod based on Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon man's domination of caves and stacked rocks. The main goal of this was for players to build and defend territories. Think of it as a poor man's civilization where instead of advancing through time, you're stuck in the Stone Age and try to be the dominant civilization. Unfortunately though, looking at the developer page, they give you a download link to go get the mod for yourself. This link ends up 404ing on a site I've never heard of, meaning that at some point in time, Paleo had decided to take down the mod entirely. And since there's no recorded footage or backup of this mod anywhere that I can find, means that it's another game lost to time itself. Another odd thing is that Paleo apparently had their own website to update people on their future projects, but if you visit it to this day, it'll leave you with a message that says the site couldn't be reached because it has been taken down by its owners. You see, Drug Wars wasn't just a bad game, it was a bad game that set forth a domino effect that ended Paleo Entertainment as a whole. To tie this video off, let's talk about Paleo Entertainment's attempt to deceive the audience. In the beginning, Paleo sent out with Troy Latimer at the helm to create a game. Whether that was for fame, fortune, or pure fun is purely up to speculation at this point since they're long gone. But Paleo would create a game, they would set up a trailer and perk a lot of ears in the process, and this would be Merchants of Brooklyn. Merchants of Brooklyn had a lot of people supporting it and waited with bated breath for its release. Eventually, Paleo would create an alpha build for this game for people to play. It was just a tech demo to show you what the game was like, but a lot of people were upset with how broken it was even for an alpha build. Paleo would eventually take notice of the negative reception the alpha was receiving and take it down, promising that they would work on the game before its full release. This gave a little bit of hope to the audience because they were taking effective action towards their game. But this is where the disgusting practices come in. With the alpha taken down, they had two options set before them. They could put in hard work and dedication to try and give these people the game they wanted and show that they did care about the people that were supporting them, or they could try to deceive their audience. You can probably guess which path they took. Paleo really wanted to milk this alpha for all it was worth, so after taking it down, they waited a while before they released what they called the full version of Merchants of Brooklyn, which is the broken buggy version we have now. The funny thing is, though, is that after playing it for a bit, people found out that this was just the alpha repackaged trying to scam a few more people into buying the game. After the negative backlash of this, they tried one more time by taking the game down and renaming it as Drug Wars. But the dumb thing is that they kept it all on the same page, so the negative reviews were still there calling them out for their scummy behavior in the first place. Which all this makes me believe that the game was supposed to be bigger, a lot more refined and polished than it is nowadays. And that because maybe the negative reception they received, that Paleo just didn't know how to handle it and said, screw it, these guys want to be dickheads not seeing that we're giving them gold and thinking it's shit, let's just not give them the full game and scam them for their money, that'll teach them. And so that just leaves us with one name, Troy Latimer. You have to realize that this is 2009, so escaping from the internet was a lot easier. No traces of him are found to this day, and Google searching Troy Latimer, there are a lot out there. A lot of people named Troy Latimer. Some baseball fans, some average Joes, some working as lawyers. But I think the Troy Latimer that we're looking for escaped. And just when I'm ready to wrap up this video, a friend of mine has sent me a link to a website known as Dun & Bradstreet, which has a very accurate profile of the Troy Latimer that made this game. And there are a lot of scary similarities outside the name. The fact that they are a principal at Paleo Entertainment LLC to the location of the company, but even this throws me off a bit because this could very well just be a performing arts school, because the industry that it's labeled under is other performing arts companies, meaning that it has something to do with art forms. I guess you could say that game development is an art form, but I wouldn't put my money on it. They even give a direct dial to Troy, but the site makes you pay for that, and I don't think it's worth doing that all off of a hunch. Even then, there are other people out there who use the Paleo Entertainment name. There's an animator here on YouTube who uses just that name. You should check them out. But yeah, kinda wild. And if I'm being completely honest, I think Troy took all the money and just ran with it. The other people that worked on this game probably didn't see a dime. And that's probably the saddest thing, is that Troy made off with all the money. The players got scammed out of their money, and the devs got scammed out of money and time that they put into this game. Where these developers are nowadays, I don't know, because Troy's the only one that I can find associated with Paleo Entertainment. But if there's anything to learn from Drug Wars, it's be careful what you invest your money into. Not everything's as black and white as it seems, and naivety kills a lot more dreams than it's led on to believe. In my personal experience, I give this game a 0 out of 10. I would never buy this game again, nor would I want to go through the agonizing process of trying to get it to work properly. Drug Wars could have been a good idea, and maybe just seeing a trailer's good enough for me. I think experiencing it really takes off those rose-tinted glasses of this being a game that had any promise. Playing the little bits that I did, it was just agonizing. There's some things that are so bad it's good, but this tried so hard to be good that it's awful. And because of this, it'll infinitely go down as one of the worst scams, worst games I've ever played and been a part of. Thank you everybody so much for watching. I will see you all next time.